between, oh my God, y'all hear my dog? Yes. Who's suddenly going nuts. Sorry. Ginger, get out. All right. All dogs and people have been secured. Hey, y'all. Welcome to The Amendment, a weekly conversation about gender, politics, and power from the 19th News and Wonder Media Network. I'm your host, Errin Haynes. So on Tuesday night, Governor Tim Walz faced off against Senator J.D. Vance in the vice presidential debate on CBS. It was definitely not the brawl that we saw in the first presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Pretty civil overall, I would say. But look, it doesn't matter what I think about this debate. It matters what voters think, which is why I was so eager to talk to Sarah Longwell. Now, Sarah is a Republican political strategist whose work focuses on defending American democracy from the authoritarian threat posed by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Sarah's conducted hundreds of focus groups and leads campaigns that are aimed at reaching persuadable voters. Who are they? Where are they? She currently serves as the executive director as Republican Voters Against Trump and is publisher of The Bulwark, a must-read, and hosts their podcast, The Focus Group, a must-listen. Plus, Sarah is an outgoing member of the 19th Board of Directors. So, Sarah, I'm so excited to get into some of the key moments from the one and only vice presidential debate. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So listen, let's just get into it. What's your initial reaction? Did this debate go about how you expected it to go?
Yeah, I guess it did. Look, this is J.D. Vance's sweet spot, right? Guy's a Yale-trained lawyer and all-around performing liar. And slippery, kind of smarmy guy. And so a couple of cameras, couple of moderators, and one opponent, that is where he does well. Where J.D. Vance does less well is with actual humans, engaging in actual human interactions. Let's say he's trying to order a donut, talk to a normal, just like an everyday person. He struggles with that, but he's good in these debate situations. And Tim Walz, who, he's debated a couple times. I went back and watched some of his old debates. It's clearly not his comfort spot. This just isn't what he does. He is much more comfortable with regular people, in front of people, chatting with people, talking to them about normal things. But like the pitter patter of a debate is not for him. And you saw it immediately. He was uncomfortable. The first question was a banger. It was a hard one. It was like, should we go into Iran? It was tough. And I think he struggled sort of from the jump. But what's interesting, I watch these things now. And now that I've done hundreds and hundreds of focus groups, I know that my reaction is not going to be the same as the voters' reactions. And the reason I know this is because I am much more like, not J.D. Vance in the sense that I am somebody who likes to lie to the American people all the time, but like J.D. Vance, like a lot of the sort of pundit and political class, like I didn't go to Yale Law. Actually, I didn't go to any law school, but like I get the debate side. Like we're all kind of these liberally arts educated people who listen. We're grading on style. We're grading on substance. Man, that is not how voters are listening to these things. The voters, and so I did 2 groups out of the jump first thing this morning because I got to touch grass. And for me, touching grass is listening to voters to get a real sense of what happened. Because if you asked me last night, and I was doing the live stream, I was like, oh man, this was just J.D. Vance. He was smarmy, but he was slick. He was shooting blue steel from his eyes. Like he looked good. He seemed very comfortable in the environment. He gave good answers. And in fact, shaded so many of the crazy and extreme things he said. He sort of either walked them back in some way, like just on the abortion issue, for example. He started being like, we need to teach women to trust the Republican Party again. We need to earn their trust back. It was very conciliatory. He was very nice to Tim Walz. Tim Walz was very nice back. It was a very Midwestern civil debate, which provided a certain kind of emotional cover for J.D. Vance.
Yeah. Look, we are in agreement on so much, much like last night with those candidates on stage. You and I are also in agreement because, my initial takeaway after watching last night was, yes, this meets expectations, right? At the same time, like you said, journalist Errin, can see one thing, and that is absolutely not necessarily voters' interpretation of what they're seeing in a debate. I think for people who were kind of tuning in for the first time to this election or starting to pay attention to these vice presidential candidates. That was not the J.D. Vance they'd heard about in media reports. That was not the J.D. Vance that they had necessarily seen on social media, interacting with folks or not interacting with folks so well, talking about Haitian immigrants eating pets, that kind of, none of that was really on display in this debate last night. So you really kind of got, really kind of the hillbilly elegy version of J.D. Vance, that very calming, voice explaining to America what a Trump Vance presidency would look like. A lot of people maybe who were watching and seeing Vance for the first time might have thought, this guy's not so bad. This guy doesn't seem weird to me, right? Like, I've heard this person was supposed to be weird. That's not really what I'm getting. At the same time, Governor Walz, he didn't necessarily come across as confident, or even, where were the zingers that he normally has, right? The campaign rally Governor Walz, or even the convention speech Governor Walz. Like, that was not who we saw last night in the debate. You were absolutely right. Midwestern nice was definitely the vibe that I felt like I was looking at. It did not or acrimonious at all, especially in terms of neither of them really attacking each other. Now, they definitely went after, the top of the ticket. They both did some of that. But in terms of going after each other, there was really not very much of that at all. And so I definitely did wonder what voters were supposed to make of that coming out of those 90 minutes. So I'm so glad that you already are asking voters if this is going to move the needle at all. I think it gives our news cycle certainly something to talk about. But what does it really mean to voters?
The voters, they watched it and they thought J.D. Vance did a good job. I've listened to two groups today, one of swing voters and one of voters who are they voted for Trump in the past, but are kind of down on him, not interested in voting for him again, or they're kind of out on him. And they all were like, "Oh yeah, J.D. Vance did a really good job. He was sharp and smart and sounded competent, but I still don't trust him, and I don't trust Donald Trump." And they thought Walz seemed uncomfortable, but also thought he was fine. They were kind of like, he seemed fine, he seemed all right, and they noted his sort of discomfort, but also found him sort of relatable enough, and nobody thought he had a catastrophic debate. Nobody thought, boy, the whole campaign is just now, upended by this performance. Yeah, one of the other things that stood out to me from the focus groups was how much the voters liked that the debate was civil. Many of them remarked on the fact that it seemed more like a presidential debate in the fact that it was had more substance and more civility. And I think that that's because voters don't realize that anytime you have a debate where Donald Trump is on the stage, right, he brings the sort of the chaos with him onto the stage. He's hurling the insults. And so you've got to be prepared. He's telling lies constantly. And J.D. Vance was also smoothly lying. But the voters liked the vibe, because voters like it. These guys, they don't like everybody yelling at each other and I can't follow what people are saying and they're talking over each other. But I think for the other sort of divide between pundits and voters, or I'll speak for myself and maybe a little bit, maybe my never Trump tribe, is we see Donald Trump as a real existential threat, right? And we have been fighting against, I think, as you said in my intro, sort of this, what we see as an authoritarian menace coming from Trump. And J.D. Vance is like his little errand boy, and who has, changed his positions, is in this role specifically because Trump got rid of his last vice president because he did his job and certified the election. And J.D. Vance won this gig with Donald Trump by going around and saying he would not have certified the election as Mike Pence did. And so J.D. Vance is unfit. J.D. Vance should not be treated as though he is just a normal, everyday candidate. And so I think we are kind of looking to Walz. Anytime you get a crack at one of these guys, what you desperately want to see is for somebody to say in front of the American people who are watching, this guy, he is supporting someone who would not engage in the peaceful transfer of power. When J.D. Vance last night said that Trump, did have a peaceful transfer of power, what kind of, and Walz did call him out on it. but not until the 92nd minute of the 90-minute debate. It was right at the end. And so I think there's just a little bit of frustration in sort of wanting to see, I love substance and I love civility. And so much of that has been missing from our politics since Donald Trump came in. And so it's a little hard to criticize the debate for being substantive and civil. On the other hand, the stakes are very high, and the American people should not be gaslit into thinking J.D. Vance is just a normal guy. And so I sort of thought there was a lot of missed opportunities from Walz.
I guess kind of on that point, because you're right, it was a more substantive debate. We got a lot more into issues. And yet, to your point, CBS had said going into this debate that they were not going to fact check, right? And so when you did have J.D. Vance saying things on the stage that were not true, that does give him an air of credibility, right? That gives him an air of credibility, which is the argument for fact checking in real time. That didn't happen. So what does it mean to have substance if we're not actually going to have people fact checking when when people are getting substance but not necessarily accurate information?
Yeah, I think the fact-checking question from the moderators is actually a really difficult one. I had Dana Bash on my program after the ABC debate to sort of ask her what she thought, because the CNN, when she and Tapper did it, they didn't fact-check.
Right.
Then the ABC moderators did fact-check. And then CBS in this said that they weren't going to fact-check, although at one point, when J.D. Vance did start talking about the Haitian immigrants and said he only cared about the Americans. He wasn't interested in talking about the Haitians, he cared about the Americans in the town. And one of them, I can't remember which one of the moderators said many of the Haitians are American immigrants. And he was like, you said you weren't going to fact check. And I got to say, it was such a telling moment, because he can't do his thing if somebody's fact checking him, which is why there is such an outcry for fact checking. On the other hand, what Dana's argument was, and I think what clearly for the most part CBS's argument was, is that the candidates need to be there to fact check themselves. It's a debate. They are the ones who have to do that. And I can sort of see both sides of this. I think I'd come down. When they started fact checking on the on the ABC, when I saw, when it started to happen, I was like, oh my gosh, do my ears deceive me? Is somebody actually going to fact check these guys or fact check Donald Trump and point out that he is lying? And I was excited about it. My gut reaction was to be excited, but it is a tricky road. The question is sort of what is the journalistic duty of somebody there? Because Dana was making the point, in a one-on-one interview, you fact check. You are there, you push back in a one-on-one interview. As a moderator, you are simply there to be a stand-in to facilitate the conversation between the two people. You are not there to insert yourself. And so I don't know. It's tough, but I will say Tim Walz, he couldn't fact check. I mean, he just that just wasn't what this guy was going to do. And actually, Tim Walz, I think Tim Walz is such a nice person, right? Which he might not be quite built exactly for this political moment, because he's such a nice guy. What he does is he looks for common ground. He just does it with the other human beings who are in front of him. He wants to find common ground. And so you could see him sort of extending himself to J.D. Vance all the time, nodding when he agreed with something J.D. Vance was saying. That's clearly what he's like as a person. But as a result, what ended up happening is it looked like he was kind of affirming so much of what Vance was saying. And so forget fact checking. Walz was actually in many ways kind of humanizing J.D. Vance on the spot, because that's what he does as a good person.
Yeah.
That might not be what we needed out of that last night. That being said, listening to these voters, it's clear to me this is not a big needle mover one way or the other. There aren't that many inflection points left in this election cycle. And this is one of the last chances to sort of try to get a bump and some momentum.
Mm-hmm. And draw the contrast,
right?
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of didn't happen. But I don't think it was, I don't think they're going to see a 2-point drop in the swing states. I don't think anything like that. I don't think voters, that's where they are in this. I think they're kind of it's fine.
To your point about Walz and his kind of demeanor and tone during the debate, I do think the combination, now that we have seen all four of these candidates in a debate setting, the case for decent legitimacy that Harris and Walz are making, like we are decent human beings, right? Like that definitely is how Walz came across last night. I mean, even being able to be, to share a stage with JD Vance, and for that to be not an acrimonious evening was to the extent that is something that voters can appreciate. Maybe that was something that meant something to them. But I do want to I want to go back to the other thing that you brought up, and that is the January 6th moment that happened in the debate, because I did think that was one of the big moments of the evening. But you're right, that came pretty late in the night. So I'm wondering, one, how many people hung in there, to even make it to that moment, and I'm sure that the Harris-Walz campaign, who certainly thought that was a big moment, we're probably wondering the same. They cut. I mean, that is the ad that they cut within hours of this debate being over. That ad is already out and airing, kind of showing that exchange where Walz specifically asks JD Vance if Donald Trump lost the election, to which Vance says, I'm focused on the future. And Walz responds, that is a damning non-answer. That really was one of Walz's big moments. I thought that was kind of a low point for JD Vance. These are people who could be in a position to, be presiding over a Senate certifying an election in 4 more years.
Yeah. I think that Walz had to get that in there. I'm glad he did. Look, I don't think that many people were hanging in there to the bitter end.
Do you wish it had happened earlier in the night?
I wish it had happened earlier, not only because I think that it's such an important thing to draw a contrast on or to point out about Vance and Trump, but also because I think it might have shaken Vance a little bit. Like, Vance had just a real head of steam. Like, as soon as it's looked like, and you could see this with Kamala too, the way that she kind of picked up as she went along. She found her footing pretty early, though. I mean, it was just a little talking pointy at first, and then she kind of hit her rhythm, and she was good. And the reason she hit her rhythm is because she knocked Trump off with that crowd size question, right?
Yes.
And once Trump was off his game, it was over, and she got her confidence. So the reason I would have brought it up earlier is I think he could have shaken Vance up a little bit earlier on something where he is weak. He knows he's weak. He doesn't feel good about it because everywhere else he was really polished. I don't think it matters from a what do voters absorb, though? Typically, look, the number of people who watch a vice presidential debate in real time, I'm interested to see the numbers to see if it was a little higher than normal.
Same.
But I suspect that based on what I'm seeing, both the Harris campaign and for the media, the fact that JD Vance, that he got kind of pinned down on that and avoided it was one of the biggest takeaways. Mm-hmm. It is the thing that people are going to see this morning in their headlines. People are going to see clips of on social media that they're going to run ads about. And so I think they will stick the landing on that overall. Like, they got the social media moment, just what so much of this stuff is now. They got out of it what they needed. But, I just think he kind of needed more moments like that. Like, he kind of missed, when I say like things were left on the table, Ukraine is a place where JD Vance, he doesn't support helping Ukraine. And like, I would have liked to have seen Walz pin him down on that. And the foreign policy came hot and heavy, like right out of the gate. And I think Walz, it was tough for him, but like Walz got that really tough question about his own record on Tiananmen Square, which he answered very poorly. Had to have known it was coming.
That was his
low point,
probably his worst moment. Yeah. I think the other point about the January 6th question is the future of democracy is something that is very important to voters. And so asking that question early because it is a priority for people going into this election, right? And especially maybe even some of those undecided voters for whom democracy is a very important issue, for them to see that contrast, I felt like could have been meaningful. There didn't really feel like there were enough moments of stark contrast in the way that moment felt like a very stark and obvious contrast between the two of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you say democracy with voters, it's a tricky word for voters because they're not necessarily like, oh, I'm voting on democracy. And democracy kind of means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what January 6th does is it reminds people of the chaos of Trump, of the fact that Trump doesn't respect people and like the rules and the rule of law. And it's all wrapped up in this thing around democracy. Like, are you going to certify votes? Are you going to take my vote seriously? Are you going to count it? And I really think getting at that, raising the salience of January 6th, reminding people, because it slides back in people's minds. Like, the economy is the front of people's minds. Immigration is very front of mind for people. And democracies, oftentimes people, like, you'll see surveys and people will say democracy matters, and you think, oh, okay, well, this is good but we interpret that as people understand that Donald Trump's a threat to democracy. But that's not it half the time. Half the time it is Republican voters saying, well, the Democrats tried to steal the last election.
Yeah.
And so I'm always careful about just saying, or about thinking that democracy is driving people, even though I'll say when it comes to the swing voters, the critical voters, a lot of the center-right and right-leaning independents who are moving away from Trump, it is because he denied the results of the last election. And so to me, it's always like not so much a broad issue of democracy, but it's a decisive one for a certain group of people.
And January 6th really is a lot of what they mean by their concerns around democracy. Okay, we got to take a break real quick, but we'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Fernandez Ancona. I am one of the co-founders of Way to Win, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. Way to Win was founded in the wake of Donald Trump's first election in 2016, and we are dedicated to upending politics as usual. We do that in a number of ways, through funding grassroots organizing in competitive battleground states, to funding messaging and narrative work to try to get us all singing from the same hymn book. And we have been supporting candidates up and down the ballot who are really bold champions for our values and the kind of future that we want to see. It really is a coalition-driven approach. We don't see any one voter segment being able to necessarily flip the election. We see a value in mobilizing and persuading at the same time, which we call mopersuasion. We see the value in speaking to this full diverse coalition that is diverse along race, gender, and geography, but also ideology. We have a big tent in this anti-MAGA coalition that has delivered wins for Democrats since the 2018 cycle in the post-Trump era. So we ultimately see our role as helping to shore up and grow that big, diverse coalition. I mean, Kamala Harris says it. We have so much more in common than what separates us. What we found is that when you focus on people's values, the vision, the things they actually want for their families, it is really more similar than you would think across a range of diverse people. So that kind of curiosity about what unites us is part of what helps us figure out those message frames. And the two examples that I would point to are, number one, the idea of freedoms. People really value freedom. It's one of the top values of all Americans that all Americans share. And it's a contested topic. And actually, Tim Walz talks about this very well, this contrast between what do we mean when we say freedom. The Republicans talk about it as restricting people, or they might think about it as like the rights of property owners or the rights of the wealthy and big corporations. And when we think about freedom, it's a much more expansive view, which is why we also say freedoms, plural, because it's not just one thing. It's multiple ways that we can be free to be who we are, free to live with clean air and water, free from gun violence, freedom to control our own bodies and decide whether and when we have children, of course. So the idea of freedom is very resonant and popular and motivating across all of our coalition. I am thrilled at how much the Democratic candidates and the party have adopted the freedoms messaging. The second example is when we talk about economic issues, what's helpful is to think about it in a larger picture. So it's not just dollars and cents, but it's actually what makes a better life. That means higher wages. That means better jobs. It also means the freedom to decide when you want to have children. It also means the ability to send your kids to a safe school. So there's a way that we can thread a lot of issues together, and that tends to be part of when we can find that sweet spot where it's both mobilizing for the folks who are more with us and persuasive to the folks who we still need to bring in. That is going to be the deciding factor. Is she the agent of change in the new generation? And can these voters, especially younger, Black and brown, largely male, can they see an economic vision where they see themselves in it and they believe that choosing Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will make their lives better, that choosing Trump and the Republicans will just make things harder for them and more expensive? That's a simple way of understanding this election. It's about our freedoms, it's about our families, it's about our futures. And we want to keep hitting that over and over again. And that is exactly what Way to Win is going to be working on for the next 30 some odd days.
Well, you brought up immigration, so I want to talk about that because you did have J.D. Vance really kind of hitting this issue a lot. J.D. Vance tying Harris directly to immigration, right? Which is what they've been trying to do, what we've seen in ads, kind of what we see on the campaign trail. Do you feel like that worked? I mean, kind of what worked and what didn't for him on immigration?
You know, it's interesting. Back in the Trump-Harris debate, Trump basically took every single question and turned it into immigration. Every single one. He tried to pivot to immigration because it's a strong issue for them. It is the one on which voters trust them the most.
Right.
J.D. Vance wasn't doing that. And I think it's because there's been a little bit of a backfire on they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. And he was hoping to avoid that, which he basically did, which is another place I wish Walz had kind of landed on him for lying and doing that to people. He's ruined that community. He's terrorized that community. He should be held accountable for that. Should have been pointed out.
Springfield missed opportunity for Governor Walz, for moderators, for both.
Yeah, for both.
Mm-hmm.
For both that should have been acted. It's like still a problem down there. Like they have totally upended that community by telling these lies. And I also think, J.D. Vance was able to call Kamala the border czar.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to kind of like say he did multiple times the people fentanyl, they're letting people pour across the border.
Harris is letting people in.
Harris is letting people in.
She's the one that's doing this.
That's right. And so he went right at that. And I just think it went more or less unanswered.
Yeah.
And even with the child separation conversation, which was a question that sort of gave Walz an opportunity to hit Vance for some of the previous policies around immigration during the Trump administration. He just didn't get there. And so I think he won most of those, most of the immigration conversations. But then again, look, it is a big liability for her. And the Walz did the one thing that I do think has been breaking through to voters a little bit, which is when Harris in the last debate with Trump brought up that there had been a bill that she had advocated for with conservative James Langford, and they had a deal and Trump scuttled it for political reasons. I had a bunch of people in the focus group say, oh, I hadn't heard that. I didn't know that. And so like that kind of hammering on Trump for political reasons took this bill out of commission. They should keep going on that. And Walz hit it. He just didn't hit it over and over again.
I want to talk about this in terms of abortion. You had Governor Walz kind of personalizing abortion, again, tying in his own experience with fertility treatment. You had J.D. Vance saying, my party needs to do better, which feels like a different approach, obviously, that we've seen in the past. I guess, what did you think about how both of these candidates talked about abortion, something we know is galvanizing folks going to the ballot box in November? May not be their top issue, but it's certainly something that they care about.
It is something they care about, and I think we should try to make it a top issue. I think that the Harris campaigns, they were at their strongest, I think, around the abortion issue, around the convention, when they were really wrapping abortion into a freedom agenda that I feel like wasn't, again, thematically last night. I didn't think they were really driving that in a way that they could.
Do you think that's because she has been the most kind of effective voice on tying abortion to the freedom, democracy piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think he tried to get at it when he was like, we're going to leave you alone. Like, it was like, or we're going to mind your own business or whatever he said. I think it was fun. Listen, here's the thing about voters. And I think this is why This is why I'm not sure that while we saw Vance's performance as strong, I'm not sure that it lands with voters quite the same way. Repetition really helps. Like having themes and driving them is what it takes to break through to voters in this fragmented, minimized attention economy, right? It's like difficult to get. So like one of the things that's happening was when you ask voters now about Kamala Harris and her views on the economy, they will say, I like that she is from a middle class background and I like that she's for the middle class.
Because she's been repeating that.
Because she says it to the point where like Republicans make fun of her, she starts all of her questions. But like that is sort of what it takes for people to be like, okay, what does this person stand for? And so I think for Walz,
but also Donald Trump is very good at
Donald Trump
repetition.
Repeats everything.
Yes.
Donald Trump has like the cadence of an 8-year-old when he talks, and it really works. I think a lot of times for voters because they're like, okay, it's like very sloganeering, build a wall, make America great again. Very accessible politics, and this is actually something I meant to mention before that I think. I've been doing media all day, but it's the first time I really thought about it. Something you said sort of tipped me off. One of the things voters don't like is a regular politician. Like I hear this all the time. I knew DeSantis was cooked with the voters when everybody was like, I think he's like just kind of a regular politician. What they love about Trump is that he's not a regular politician. And I think what people like about Kamala Harris right now is she's transcending regular politician into a more cultural phenomenon that has been working for her. Last night, Walz didn't seem like a regular politician, but JD Vance did. And so I also think that we look at this and think, well, JD Vance definitely won on technicalities and points. And I think Walz needed to drive themes a little better. I think he needed to be on offense a little bit more. But I also think that voters didn't look at him and think, boy, he seems like a practiced slick politician. They thought he's like, I think he seems mostly like a normal guy. And like, that's fine with me.
Yeah. And I mean, look, Trump is obviously the known quantity between the four of them, right? He's the person that the American people are very, very familiar with. The other three people on this ticket are people that a lot of the American people do not know, which I think is why you saw Vice President Harris doing so much to kind of lean into her personal story, talk about who she is, talk about her background, and also kind of pivot to how that might inform policy and how she would govern. Governor Walz, I think people kind of did get a sense last night of him more as a person, got kind of more of a sense of his personal story. I mean, yes, Senator Vance was very polished. He's very good at debating, but like how much did you actually learn about JD Vance, the person, if that was somebody you were also looking to know more about?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing he hit a little bit of his bio with his mom and his grandmother. Like he said
the grandmother piece, yes.
And he was talking about like his beautiful children. He talked a little bit about his wife. Like he was trying to do a few things to humanize himself. Like I think last night, JD Vance his big attempt was like, see me as a human because I'm not being good at connecting with humans through this campaign. And I think that the problem is that I think it helped a little bit in the sense that people like knew he was doing a good job, and maybe they learned a little bit more about him, but nobody came away thinking he just had regular politician vibes all over him. And I think that might be why at the end of the day, Vance, I think, probably did himself a little bit of help. He gave himself a little bit of help in terms of how deep his negatives were. Because I've never seen anybody, except for the way Republicans talked about Mike Pence in the 2 years after the 2020 election, I have not heard voters talk as negatively about a candidate as they do about JD Vance. They just do not like him. Last night, I bet he went from like -30 in favorability to maybe -5. Whereas I think Walz probably just built a more positive identity, less because he demonstrated any particular kind of competency on the issues, but more because people are like, oh, he had like a gun that he would take pheasant hunting after practice that he kept in his trunk. And like, that guy seems normal.
You brought up guns. I wanted to talk about that too, because you had JD Vance kind of talking about bolstering school security and America's mental health crisis, the kind of stuff Republicans talk about when they talk about guns. But then you had Walz coming back. I also thought this was another one of his stronger moments when he was saying, sometimes it's the guns, that line that he had. That felt like more of kind of where a lot of the American people are. But I wonder what you thought about that, or if the focus groups had anything to say about that gun violence moment.
So first of all, it didn't come up too much in the focus groups. I think part of the reason that section was just a little bit muddled is Governor Walz tells this very, he does kind of a quick story about his son being in, like, there was a shooting and he was there and witnessed it. And at JD Vance, I thought he said some phrase that exhibited that he felt great sympathy for that happening. And so
it was like good God Almighty or something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that, that I thought ended up kind of being good for Vance in the way that he was showing empathy. And I think that Republicans always sound really dumb when they talk about door safety and like window safety. Like these are the problems. But like Vance kind of does that slick thing, did it and moved on. In a way that I didn't think either of them came out of that exchange. Actually, I think I would say the main thing for Walz is that Walz and Harris have both been trying to move to the center on guns in a way that says, I'm trying to figure out what to do about these school shootings and the fact that our kids are being terrorized, while also making it clear that I believe that gun ownership is fine. And in fact, we are both gun owners and comfortable with guns. And so I think they've been trying to paint kind of a different picture than many other Democrats have. And I think that works well for them. But I thought that JD Vance also painted a slightly different picture than a lot of less adept Republicans. Like, let's view out a Ted Cruz or somebody else who can be really schlocky on the gun issue. I thought JD Vance was also very capable at handling it in that exchange.
Yeah, just listening to you, I think it's also interesting that or maybe I just have not heard, and this could be the case, frankly, for Governor Walz doing more interviews with reporters. This is somebody who was a teacher in the era of mass shootings in schools, and he's talked about how his daughter has informed his thinking around guns and gun reform. But I would imagine that experience also affected him and affected how he thinks about this. So like the story that he told about his son was certainly something that we had not heard before, but I wonder what other kinds of stories are out there like for him around
a great point.
That issue.
That is a great point. And it sort of goes to, I think, what Walz struggled with last night, which is, I bet in a conversational way, if he had been talking about this, he would have leaned on the fact that he's a teacher. He's like, look,
absolutely,
let me tell you what's happening in these schools and like the drills these kids are doing. And I think my guess is he could be very compelling in a conversational way about these things. That like he went into that debate though, all prepped. Pete Buttigieg, who has the best words and is quick and light on his feet when it comes to these debates, had prepped him. And I think, Walz was nervous and he was all stocked up and prepped. And like, he didn't have the ability to kind of do that easy, breezy, let me tell you the real story. Let me tell you about my background. Let me bring it all back to my own personal experience. The ways that he was doing that in this debate felt a little canned, right? Because he had been so prepped. And I think, I just think it's just not his environment.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you hear in your focus groups about who they thought did better in this debate? Did they have thoughts on a clear winner?
Yeah, so they didn't talk about win and lose.
Huh, okay.
I think we think in terms of won and lost. And instead, I listened to the voters, and actually, I think that they liked Walz more after the debate. And I think they thought JD Vance was more talented than they thought, and maybe less extreme than they thought. Or we're a little, but we're still suspicious of him. And I don't think one debate was enough to make them either fall head over heels in love with Walz or to decide they hated JD Vance even. Like it's sort of, or to totally redeem JD Vance.
And like the other thing is, there's only, at this point, there's only one scheduled debate. So this was it, right?
This was it.
Meanwhile, you're going to have both of these candidates out on the campaign trail. How they come across to those people is what is going to make the difference. It feels like to me in a much bigger way than whatever happened on stage last night.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. We're on to ground game and turnout now. It's election season. People are voting. Right. Well, I mean, Sarah, thank you so much for the reminder that, yes, what we think matters. Obviously, we would not have podcasts if that was not true, but what the voters think matters so much more. So thank you for helping me unpack this and for helping me to remind people that, we need to keep listening to voters over the next 5 weeks so that we know what's going to happen, on the other side of November 5th.
Thanks. I wish I knew exactly what was going to happen, though, you know?
Don't we all? Don't we all? Where's my time machine?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of The Amendment. But one more thing before y'all go, since I know we've got some listeners here in the South. So, on October 17th, the 19th crew and I will be at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, my hometown, for a conversation on Black women in the 2024 election. So I really, really hope that you will join me for this event. We're going to focus on the issues that the newer electorate cares about, everything from climate justice to LGBTQ+ advocacy. This group we know is an absolute force at the polls, and it's high time that we hear from them. So register now, reserve your space at 19thnews.org/Atlanta2024. The Amendment is a co-production of the 19th News and Wonder Media Network. Our executive producers are Jenny Kaplan, Terry Rupar, Faith Smith, and Emily Rutter. The show is edited by Grace Lynch and Julia B. Chan. Produced by Brittany Martinez, Grace Lynch, and Lucy Jones. And post-production support from Julie Bogan, Lance Dixon, and Winton Wong. Artwork by Aria Goodman. Our theme music is composed by Jalen.